Welcome back. This is Steph from Cold-Blooded Freaks, and in today's episode, we are talking about two of the most popular medium-sized lizards that you can have. We are comparing Uromastyx to bearded dragons. Let's get to it. The first thing that we're starting off with is the way they look and the overall characteristics of each animal. So now when you're talking about Uromastyx, they have a very adorable little face. Some people say they almost look like a tortoise without a shell. I can kind of see it. I can kind of see that little beak-like face. They have big cheeks and a very small little round head. That is because they have a very powerful jaw muscles that are able to eat things like seeds and lentils and stuff like that. So they don't tend to bite, but definitely not something you would want to get bit by. I have a Uromastyx. I have two of them. They've never tried to bite me, never even thought about it. So that's just my experience. Maybe others have been bit by them, and I'm sure it hurts. Otherwise, their body is quite smooth up until their tail, where it's very bumpy and jagged and kind of prickly, if you will. That is because these animals like to burrow themselves into very thin crevices and stuff to keep them protected from anything in the wild that's trying to come get them, because they leave their tail on the outside, not so much protruding out from the hide, but kind of blocking the entrance to the hide so that animals or predators cannot necessarily get them as easily. And the first thing they run into is that pokey tail, and they inflate themselves so they can't necessarily be pulled out so easily. Bearded dragons, on the other hand, are quite prickly everywhere. They have more of a, what I would say is a rectangle face. So they have a very cute, they have more dimensions to their face. They have almost a crown of spikes that go around their head. And they're very cool because those spikes really only get tough when they are stressed out. So they also inflate, they'll kind of blow themselves up a little bit. And those pokey parts that go all around their body will get more firm and end up actually not bending as much as they do when the animal is relaxed and they're not stressed out. But that is one of their defense mechanisms. They actually kind of go sideways. They blacken their beard. They open their mouths. They can be a little bit threatening when you see them in the wilds. But what we see as pets today, they're very calm. I can only say I've been bit by one bearded dragon, and I did do a lot of rescuing with bearded dragons. And their bite doesn't hurt that much, but they do kind of grab and shake. But again, they also don't tend to bite. Next topic that we're talking about is availability. Unfortunately, with Uromastyx, this is probably one of their biggest cons, is that they are very heavily imported or wild caught. When you have an imported animal or wild caught animal, you have more of a chance of the animal not doing so well in captivity. And that's where it could kind of get tricky, because a lot of these Uromastyx do come in with heavily parasitic loads in their body, and they can fail. And not to mention sometimes the stress of being imported and then going to a seller and then being sold, and now they're in a new enclosure. Everything's just a whole lot of shock and a whole lot of stress. There are people that do take imports and acclimate them before they sell them. I would highly recommend trying to find a breeder. You are going to pay a little bit more, but if you can find a breeder, that is the best way to do it. This way you don't have to worry about any of those intestinal parasites that they may have and stuff like that, where you are just more likely to fail with an animal that is just so unique and so beautiful. And that is one of the biggest cons about them. But I think that that is going to change in the near future, and I cannot wait to see that happen. Moving on to the bearded dragon availability, which is very different. You can go to a pet store and get a bearded dragon for $20, sometimes less. And that's kind of crazy to think about, because there are just so many of them, and there's just You can get them at reptile shows. You can get them at pet stores. You can get them at pretty much anywhere that sells animals has bearded dragons. They are very unique animals. With that said, you can get one for $20 or you can get one for thousands of dollars. It varies quite a bit, but it really depends on what you're looking for, which brings me to the next topic. The next topic that we're talking about is colors. So with Uromastyx, they have different localities. So there are quite a few. I'm not going to go over all of them, but there are quite a few of different variant colors. Like ornate Uromastyx is one that comes to mind, which is one of my personal favorites. The males can be very blue. They could be very green. Very, very unique looking, very cool. And they could also be different sizes based on the localities. You can have a smaller locality or an even larger locality, depending on what you're looking for. When it comes to bearded dragons, there are so many different genetic mutations of color that are out there, and it's very, very interesting because you can get a bearded dragon now that is either almost white gray color, black, red, yellow, orange. There's so many different colors out there, and it's cool in the aspect that you can pick kind of based on what you're looking for color-wise by price, and you get to see the lineage, which I find even probably the most important part for me is being able to see the parents. Having the breeders be able to show you, okay, this is what I bred to this to make the baby. You can kind of see where the baby might end up looking like, things like that. And that is the best part of having something that is captive bred, is that you know where its lineage came from. And I feel like that is something that we're missing a little bit in the Uromastyx, but I think, like I said, I think we're going to get there. So I cannot wait. Now we're going to talk about enclosures. So when it comes to the size of the enclosure, I would say Uromastyx and bearded dragons are quite similar with the size of their enclosure. I always recommend nothing smaller than a 40-gallon breeder, since that is about 4 by 2, I believe, and I think it's about 2 tall, if I'm not mistaken. 40-gallon breeder, not a 40-gallon tall. And I think that's one of the best enclosures that you can have. You can also get them opening frontwards, which I find very important because when you have Uromastyx, their biggest predator is up in the air. So when you come down on them, they tend to be a little bit more skittish versus if you come towards them. They're a little bit less fearful and they just get used to you faster. And then bearded dragons, they like to climb on things. You could put anything you want, any sort of hide, any sort of crevice. That bearded dragon's never going in that crevice or hide or anything. It's going to be on top of the highest point, sitting, basking in its sun. They're very cute, but they will not hide ever. They'll always be out. Uromastyx, on the other hand, you're going to end up putting lots of crevices and lots of hides, and you probably want to have a almost stacked like rock look because that is their natural environment, and they will wedge themselves, and sometimes you won't really see them, but they do come out, and they definitely love their food, and if they can associate you with food, they'll always be out anytime you're home. The other differences in these two about their enclosure would be their lighting requirements. Now, Uromastyx require a very, very hot spot, if you will. Their enclosure itself has to be quite warm, but their hot spot can be upwards to 140. 140 degrees is quite hard to reach with one light. So sometimes that is achieved with more than one light. So you might need a ceramic bulb and another full spectrum UV heat light, but they do need full spectrum UV, and they also do need quite the substantial amount of heat. With my Uromastyx, I have a very, very high wattage full spectrum UV heat lamp combo with a ceramic light bulb right next to it, and they are able to achieve their perfect temperature. They sit there and they bask. They'll also move around and kind of go through the rest of the enclosure. So keep that in mind if you do get a Uromastyx, that you want to keep an eye on that temperature with them, because it is very, very important for their health and their metabolism. With bearded dragons, you can come down a little bit lower with that heat level. So you might need one heat lamp, but you, again, full spectrum UVB is a must, and that heat lamp. So you may want to do a smaller wattage heat lamp, but you need that bar for the UVB, or however you want to do it. There's so many different options for both of these animals when it comes to UVB. You could do UVB separate from the actual heat source, or you can now have them together, which I find very nice, because back in the day I would have like 7 domes on one enclosure. But regardless, they're both very similar, but one is a little bit hotter, I would say. So the next thing that we're talking about is their diet. Their dietary needs are kind of the same and kind of not at all at the same time. So Uromastyx, if you're able to get one from a baby, and man, they are the cutest little babies. I don't know, I am a sucker for a baby Uromastyx. They're just so adorable. I just want to pinch their little cheeks. But anyway, the first thing that they eat right off the rip is very, very leafy greens. So you want to stay away from things like spinach, but they love leafy greens. They will eat leafy greens for their entire life, and they they get fat on them quite quick. It's very interesting, but they love, love, love their leafy greens. I have been told that some people do sporadically feed their Uromastyx a bug here or there. Mine look at me like it's an alien when they see it, so I just stopped really offering it to them. But hey, maybe some do. Maybe when they're more hungry, they will. But mine love their leafy greens. I go to the supermarket, and sometimes I get dandelion greens. Sometimes I get, I think it's Swiss chard. I get all sorts of different things for them, and they love all of it. When it comes to bearded dragons, they are also absolutely adorable as babies. But they are very, very heavy bug eaters. Many, many moons ago, if you will, I did breed 2 of my bearded dragons together and had a very large clutch of babies. I had about 30 hatchlings all hatch out, and I was feeding hundreds of crickets a day to these guys. Granted, if you just have one, you're still going to go through quite a bit of very small, appropriate sized crickets for that baby to start growing. And due to the fact that they're eating crickets, I do warn you, their poop might be a little rough, to say the least. But that is mainly because they're eating insects. Once they move up and they get a little bit bigger, they're going to start eating more and more greens, and the insect to green ratio will change. So as an adult, they're going to be eating a lot more greens than they are going to be eating insects. So your cost for food will change a little bit. So both, like I said, Uromastyx and bearded dragons love their greens, but you're still going to be getting some bugs for your bearded dragon when it's adult, but it's not going to be costing you a whole lot like it does when they're young. It is very expensive sometimes to keep the little babies fed and happy and fat when they're eating so many bugs at that young age. Moving on to our last topic, and to me is one of the most important topics, which is handleability. When you have these awesome animals, one of the most important things about having it is being able to interact with your animal, because that is why we love these animals. I always say they're like little dinosaurs, even though dinosaurs were not reptiles, which is kind of sad. But regardless, I love being able to hold my Uromastyx. I loved being able to hold my bearded dragons. And I will tell you, there is quite a difference. So obviously with a Uromastyx, being that there is a higher likelihood of them being imported, there's a good chance you need to work with your Uromastyx a little bit to make them a little bit more comfortable in your hands. Something else about Uromastyx, Uromastyx aren't giant climbers. Don't get me wrong, they do like to climb, but they don't necessarily want to like live on your shoulder or necessarily be held as you're walking around the house doing things. That's not really their vibe. They kind of rather sit down, watch TV with you, you know, read a book. They're kind of more just hang out and chill. But one of the things I love about both of these guys is when they think something is intriguing to them, they will run up and lick it. For some reason, I find that the most adorable thing that they do. But bearded dragons, on the other hand, usually because they are raised from a baby in captivity, they are very, very handled from a young age. They're almost bomb-proof. I have had them try to jump from my hands, though, from time to time, just because I feel like they are just a little bit more crazy than a Uromastyx, but bearded dragons notoriously love to just hang out on your shoulder. You'll see tons of other YouTubers that will have just their bearded dragon just hanging out on their shoulder. I used to do my dishes with my bearded dragon on my shoulder. Sometimes he would go on my head. It didn't really matter. He was just happy to be at the highest point and being able to watch everything else that was going on. Another thing about both of these little reptiles, if you will, are that they are extremely hardy. So whatever animal you choose is likely to do very well. The only thing, like I said before, is the fact that if a Uromastyx hasn't been acclimated to domestic life, if you will, you might have a little bit of a harder time. But otherwise, if both are already established and doing great, their hardiness is about the same. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. These little medium lizards, if you will, are definitely the topic of a lot of conversations in the reptile world. And there's some very, very large leaps that Uromastyx have done. There's now albino Uromastyx, and there's some great color spectrums that you can get with bearded dragons. In the comments below, I would absolutely love to know what you guys think. Have you had one or the other? Have you had both? I want to know what you guys think because I know my personal favorite, but I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.